Well, it's good to be with you today. This is Dr. Buddy Crum here today with my partner, Don Wells, and we're always glad to come and share with you what we can. We always invite your questions if you'll just send them to us, but we also invite you to go to and Help Me Invest, where Don is there and spends 30 minutes with you on a Zoom just to find out what it is that are your goals and desires and what areas you need to invest. And he's not selling you anything, has no portfolio to sell you. We just have such a heart to see the kingdom of God established through having wealth, and that's part of it. Well, Don, let me put you on the spot.
Okay.
We've talked a lot, and we always do talk about investments for retirement, financial independence, and certainly that is something that we'll always talk about, because that's why one of the main reasons you do invest. But this is a younger couple, and they're saying, "Well, I'd like to buy a house. We'd like to move into a home." Talk a little bit about how you go about that in determining how much to invest. Is that an investment, and how do I go about it?
Well, and you bring a great point. That's a very good question. It actually comes up a lot. People want to do that. So I've mentioned this in one of our segments before. It's been 2-3 years ago that Bloomberg, who tracks financial trends and analysis, and they're pretty sophisticated in the models that they use. They tracked housing across the United States in a variety of different income levels and housing markets, and they came back with a surprising statistic to many people, but not as many in the industry, because we've known that housing did not return but a 2.2% return after 10 years. Meaning that it's not the greatest investment. Now people say, well, real estate. Well, now real estate can be a little different, but when we're talking about buying a house, fixing it up, going to Home Depot or Lowe's and spending some money, HOA, all the additions and things that need to be fixed, over a 10-year segment, what they found out is it only returned about a 2.2% return.
Yeah,
so
about like inflation.
Yes, exactly. And so, then it became, renting then is not the worst thing in the world. Now, we all like to own a home, and I understand that dynamic. I'm talking purely numbers here. We all like that house, the safe haven. But I tell young people that all the time for the purpose of understanding that we want to rush to get a house sometimes. Sometimes my advice most of the time to young couples is let's try to save up, because there's a lot of things that go into buying a house, and what we call PITI, which is your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. That's kind of your payment. And there's a formula for that and how we do that. But if we don't put down enough, they have now what's called PMI insurance. And so now on top of your payment, you're paying PMI insurance. PMI insurance is simply when the industry said, listen, people go in a house and they tear it up and we own it and we have to fix it up, so we're going to put PMI insurance. It's just extra money that you're going to pay that's going to the bank to protect them in case you tear up your house. You say, well, I'm not going to tear my house up. So 20% down on a house avoids that, and that's big. Over time, that's a big number. That's a big. You're wasting a lot of money on that. So I usually tell people, let's get a plan, and the first thing we want to do is start investing. I would rather see a couple invest, rent for a little while, get their investments going, because again, that compound interest, and then later on buy and wait. I did that in my own life. I was in the military, but I didn't buy my house till I think I was in my mid-30s or before I ever bought my first house. And I'm not saying that's for everybody, but usually when I sit down with a couple and they're just starting out, investing is usually the first thing I try to get them to do. If we can get something investing and build that discipline, it's a life changer. It changes your life. It sets you on course, and you do that. And then we can start looking at being able, and the same thing goes with debt. People get so enamored with paying off their debt. I'm not saying that we're advocates of debt. We do believe, as you've heard us say on different programs, in debt leveraging, which is when you have the ability to pay something off, but you leverage that against somebody else's money, and I won't go into that here. But sometimes people become so fascinated with paying off their debt, they spend years doing that rather than saying, I'll pay all my debt, but I need to get something invested, because they don't have any seed in the ground. They don't have anything growing for their future. And so by the time they get their debt and they get all of that, now they're starting later in the game, and they don't have that compound interest that could have been working for them for years.
You know, people depending upon their home being in their investment was one of the reasons that brought about reverse mortgages.
Yes.
That when
That's
people
right.
got ready to retire, the only equity they had was in their home.
Yeah.
Because they had invested so heavily in it.
Yeah.
And then they had to reverse their mortgage, which meant they didn't have to make a payment on the mortgage, and money came back to them. And so it's kind of like the market. You went up, then you came down.
That's right.
But,
That's
you
right.
know, that's why when you start a financial plan, as we've said, when it comes time to buy a house, be sure you got your emergency fund built up, first of
right.
all,
That's
which
right.
says if there's some reason I lost my job,
Mm-hmm.
or I couldn't pay my rent, or or mortgage, but rent, for at least 6 months.
Yeah.
That now you're not going to lose. If you lose your job, you can lose all your income.
Sure.
Of course, we have unemployment and all of that. The government helps, because if the government didn't help, it would ruin the economy.
That's right.
Everybody's houses would be that lost their job
Yeah.
would be for sale. So in other words, build that emergency fund, we call it, which is a minimum of 3 months to 6 months of your monthly living expense.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, if it takes you $3,000 a month to live, then you need to build up at least $18,000 in assets, investments. Then you start. The other thing doesn't mean you spend the $18,000.
That's right.
It means now I'm ready to go to the next level, which is consider buying a home, and because there's value in a home. But you know, one thing I remind people of: if you rent like an apartment, you know what your cost is.
That's
I mean,
right.
your utilities and your rent. If you buy a home, I can promise you it's going to cost you a lot more to keep it up. You've got to do a lot of the things that you didn't have to do if you were renting a place, for example.
Yeah.